Moving on to other news now, the Australian Human Rights Commission says almost all of the children in detention on Christmas Island are sick. Representatives from the Commission have recently returned from a visit to the Immigration Detention Centre. They say entire families are living in small metal containers in hot conditions, making the spread of infections inevitable. For more on this, we're joined now by the President of the Commission, Gillian Triggs. Gillian Triggs, welcome. So you've just returned from Christmas Island and you were there 4 months ago. How does the situation there now compare to 4 months ago, firstly in terms of health?
Well, there's been a very significant deterioration in my judgment, but also in the judgment of the medical team, the paediatrician that we took with us, Elizabeth Elliott. It's been very, very distressing to observe the difference over the last few months, partly exacerbated by the deterioration in health conditions, mental and physical, but also by the first anniversary of the policy that from now on those arriving by boat will not be settled in Australia.
So tell us more about the physical condition of the children there.
Well, we interviewed about or met well over 200 adults, and of course concentrated on the children and the teenage boys. My observation was that they were all coughing, they were all distressed with some kind of bronchial condition or other, and the medicos can explain that in more detail than I can. But the other thing that was distressing was the mental decline. Children who wouldn't make eye contact, who have nothing to do during the day. They're wandering around in the dirt with the chickens, with literally no structure in order to their day. But I should say a school is about to be opened, and we hope that that will transform their lives.
Are there cases of children self-harming?
Yes, and that, in a way, is one of the reasons that prompted this second visit, because we've been particularly concerned by a disproportionate number. 128 children have self-harmed within a reporting period over 15 months, and they're departmental figures, which is significantly higher than the 80 or so alleged in relation to adults. So you can see very dramatically by those figures the impact that this is having on those children.
You mentioned the government is responding to some of your requests. Is it it was your request to have some sort of education system there?
Yes, and that is the ray of light, because I believe that school will get started on what will be a sort of term 3 with some teachers coming from Western Australia. I met briefly the headmaster. That will mean that there's some order and structure to their lives. The children themselves know the danger of not having education, and this will give them a curriculum that's not just a playgroup activity in drawing pictures, but a curriculum for their age group that will obviously have to be very carefully managed, given that these children have been in such traumatic circumstances.
So what has been on offer for these children so far in terms of activities or education?
Well, almost nothing. There have been some English language classes that are appropriate for some groups, and some of the children have gone to those. But otherwise, virtually nothing. Occasionally they might get a sort of playgroup activity, but the children themselves are contemptuous of that. They know the difference between education and a playgroup. So they've had very, very little to keep them going.
So how did you feel leaving that island, knowing the situation that those people continue to be on there now?
Well, I felt very, personally, very distressed by it, much more so, I might say, than I've been to Christmas Island 3 times now. Personally, obviously, it starts to, you really have a sense of the despair of these people. But I think I came back more determined than ever that this story has to be told to the Australian public. I think that every Australian, of whatever political persuasion and however threatened they feel by refugees, I feel that this story must be told, because Australians will hang their heads in shame when this is really understood, that we're treating these children. There are more than, I think, 1,100 people on the island, 174 children. And of course we mustn't forget the story of those children that are still held in mainland detention centres, to say nothing of the hundreds that are being held in Nauru. So I think this story has to be understood, that we've gone too far, and we need to try harder to achieve a more humane outcome, and in particular assess their claims to refugee status, because by not doing it you strip away whatever dignity they have and the legal right that they see themselves as having as genuine refugees.
So how does this reflect on Australia internationally?
Well, very poorly. And I've been invited by the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights to go to Geneva in another 10 days. to try to understand. They are trying to understand how this is happening in Australia, because we're good international citizens, we respond very well, we assist with peacekeeping, we assist with donations, we do all sorts of good and useful things over many decades. And the UN is trying to understand why we are taking such a unique position, an extremely harsh position, contrary, of course, to the legal obligations.
So what are you going to be telling the UN?
Well, I hope to put as objective a position as I can, so that they can understand what the concerns have been in Australia, the genuine concerns
because
of people
of
arriving.
course, the government's argument is that it's doing this to stop people getting on boats and dying at sea.
That's right, and that has to be understood. The concern of Australians about very significant numbers coming last year, the deaths of families at sea, horrible, and all Australians wanted that to stop. But what is difficult for the UN to understand is what is the connection between the inhumane treatment of children and families for very long periods of time and a deterrent policy. And I think what we're saying, and I think what the UN is concerned about, is that there is no evidence that these extremely cruel policies have any connection to deterring people smugglers. And when we interview the asylum seeker refugees, they almost all say to us, we had absolutely no idea of the nuances of Australian policy. We don't understand this and we don't get it.
But the government has argued the boats have stopped.
And the boats have stopped. We have objective evidence of that by military means. So that's been effective if that's the approach. And we'll put that to one side. But what we're arguing is it's not clear at all that the treatment of those that are with us, that have come through, is affecting the ability to stop them, asylum seekers taking the promises and beguilements of people smugglers.
And just finally, we've got this continuing situation with 157 Sri Lankan asylum seekers being held at sea on an Australian boat. What are your reflections on that? Because you've been out of the country for a while, obviously, at Christmas.
Well, of course, we've been trying to follow the story, but again, rather like the issue that prompted our visit to Christmas Island, it's similar with this boat. We had to go because the government won't give us the information. Now, with regard to this boat, again, it's hard to know what's going on, but we do know that they've been on this ship for a very long time. We don't know their location, and we don't know what's going to happen to them. And, of course, this is subject to the High Court, and we hope that the High Court will resolve this fairly quickly. The core point that I would like to make is that, as a matter of international law, customary law, and the Refugees Convention, we may not return these people, refool them or return them to the country from which they're fleeing from conflict and discrimination.
OK, Gillian Triggs, thanks very much for coming in to talk to us.
Thank you very much indeed.